If you find yourself overthinking about how to do everything the right way and you're tired of delaying tasks or taking action because it all just feels too overwhelming, then you are in the right place. Perfecting Imperfectionism invites you to move past overthinking and self-doubt, declutter your mind, and create a life that reflects who you really are. I'm Laura Meredith, and I'm a certified professional coach and ambitious professional. My mission is to show you the power of embracing imperfectionism so you too can create a career and life you love. Let's start perfecting imperfectionism. Welcome back to Perfecting Imperfectionism. I am your host, Laura Meredith, and I cannot wait to dive into another exploration around perfectionism. So last week, we talked about what perfectionism really is, what it isn't, and how to start to interrupt thoughts and behaviors that really drive us toward burnout. And I so far just want to take a moment to talk about the wonderful response that I've received to the pod so far. And I've gotten so many messages and feedback from you. And I just truly appreciate your support, your feedback, you just tuning in and listening more than you know. So thank you so much for leaning into this journey with me and supporting this dream of mine to help spread the word about how important it is to dismantle our perfectionism. And on the one hand, I'm not so happy that so many of you are dealing with these perfectionist tendencies that are exhausting you emotionally and mentally and physically. But on the other hand, I am so happy that you found my podcast and you are able to learn more about yourself and start to give yourself more compassion and grace and just ease up on that internal tension. So thank you. And I'm so excited for you to keep listening and learning more. So in this episode, we will talk about why perfectionists dread feedback. Oh, feedback can be such a controversial or like anxiety-inducing topic for people, especially those who struggle with perfectionism. And today we'll talk about why we dread it, why it can feel like a personal attack when received, the cost of avoiding and misinterpreting or deeply internalizing this feedback, and how we can move forward and reclaim feedback in a neutral, growth-driven way with actionable steps and tips that you can take today to navigate this going forward. And so you might be wondering, Laura, how do I know if I really feel afraid of feedback? Okay, well, I have some questions for you. So, do you ever feel your stomach drop when someone says, "Can I give you some feedback?" or "Can I share a thought with you on this?" Or have you ever replayed feedback or criticism that you've received over and over, even when it was meant to help, or even if you had a mostly glowing review, or you had a suggestion for improvement that was delivered to you gently? So if you've repeated and replayed that feedback over and over in your head? Or on the flip side, do you actively seek out feedback almost obsessively and ask for it constantly to make sure that you aren't completely missing the mark on something and that you can get ahead of any surprises and make sure that you're not disappointing anyone? So if you have answered yes to any of those questions, you likely have some fear around receiving feedback. And we're going to talk about how you can navigate that today. So good news all around. So there are a few reasons why feedback might be daunting to you, my fellow perfectionist friend. And before I go into a few different scenarios where this may come into play for you, my disclaimer for this topic is that I am not talking about feedback from abusive or toxic leaders or colleagues. Okay, this is about managing how we receive constructive, healthy, well-intentioned feedback from others in the workplace. Got it? Okay. let's get into it. So you might have a fear of judgment, have some all or nothing thinking, or you might have some control around like image management or even control management that comes into play. So we'll dissect what each of these means. So if you have a fear of judgment, this can mean that your perfectionism ties your self-worth to your performance, and that critique might feel like a threat to your identity of getting things right. So this is you if you know you care a lot. You know you try really hard. You know that you give it your all. And yet, if someone gives you feedback, you might take that to mean that they think you don't care. Or at your core, you might be afraid that they think that you don't understand what needs to be done or why this matters. You may fear being misunderstood or judged, and you might fear that people are thinking, why did we hire them? Something is wrong with them, or they don't get it. So if to you, feedback means that someone will judge you, your effort, or your work product, and that translates to judgment, it makes so much sense that you would be afraid to hear that. And so that translates to that fear of judgment. You might also suffer from all or nothing thinking. And this can show up like the thoughts, if I get something wrong, it means I'm not good enough. Or that making a mistake means that you aren't worthy of doing whatever work you're doing, or of being trusted with an assignment, or that you shouldn't be in this position, or that you shouldn't be leading this project, or like, I can't do this, or I don't know enough to be able to do this. So it's kind of all or nothing. So if there's anything that you don't know or that you don't get right away, you may think, that's it, I'm just not even going to try at all. Okay, so that's the second one. The third one is this like control and image management. And so when you receive feedback, you might be afraid that like your image of having it all together is disrupted, or that people may think that you don't have it all together, or that you don't know what you're doing, or that you're not in control of your life, your product, yourself, how you come across. Like you might have this fear around that perception being challenged and thinking that feedback translates to you not being able to have things together. And then finally, I want to talk through signals in your emotional and your physical reactions. So if you are, when receiving feedback or when thinking about feedback that you've received or thinking about the idea of getting feedback, you have racing thoughts, you have defensiveness, or you feel shame or embarrassed, or you feel tension, that can signal that you're afraid of feedback. So a story that I want to share with you that I will connect throughout each part of this podcast is about some feedback that I received very early in my career. So my manager had told me that sometimes when I coughed or cleared my throat when I was on calls, that it was distracting. And I had absolutely no idea that I was doing this. And she told me that it would be helpful if I could go on mute rather than just saying like, excuse me, after I cough or after I clear my throat. And instead of like slowing down and just like looking at the facts of the situation, I totally spiraled. I was truly so embarrassed. And I thought that that meant that I was being disgusting on calls and that I was embarrassing myself and I was embarrassing my manager and I was ruining my professional image. And I will continue to build on this example as we go through the episode. But the headline for this section is that I spiraled after receiving this feedback. And now I want to talk through the cost of avoiding or misinterpreting feedback. And when we think about feedback as like this like dangerous thing or like this scary thing, this thing that threatens our credibility or our success or our image or means that we don't know what we're doing, we are missing out on some things and we're potentially creating strain in other places. And so some of those are that we might miss growth opportunities. We might strain our relationships with our colleagues or with our managers or our clients. And we might increase our burnout within ourselves. And it can also reinforce our perfectionism and our imposter syndrome. So let's really drill into each one of these. So for growth opportunities, not taking feedback neutrally, which I will get into after this section, can result in missed growth opportunities. And this can happen because we may not really hear what the feedback giver is saying to us. And when we shut down or we get defensive, we miss an opportunity to get curious. And we may not understand which problem they're trying to help us solve. And we may not be trusted to improve our work in the future, or in a worst case scenario, we may not be trusted to deliver anything. We may not be given stretch assignments, or we might have work taken over rather than be given the chance to iterate and improve upon something. So we might do our work, and then at a certain point, it might be taken from us saying like, okay, great, Laura, thanks for doing this. We'll take it from here. And then they might change it all because they may not trust us to manage the feedback. Okay, so that's one. We may miss out on some growth opportunities. We also might unintentionally strain our relationships in the workplace. So when we don't receive feedback calmly, our colleagues may not want to hurt our feelings when giving us feedback. And we may unintentionally teach them that giving us feedback is not a safe space for them to be, or that giving us feedback is not going to be something that we receive well, and it's better to just keep us calm. And they may then have to treat giving us feedback so gently and with such care that they may never tell us exactly what we can improve, and they might keep feedback really vague, really high level, just kind of scratch the surface to see how we react to it. So we may not actually understand how we're showing up and how we're impacting our team, our manager, our clients, our stakeholders, the people we're supporting. And so we miss out on these opportunities to improve relationships and also create strain on others in the process. Another impact of not managing feedback in a healthy way is that this can lead to increased burnout, because it may directly impact our tendencies to over-prepare and to avoid future critique. And so we may try to get things just right before asking for feedback or for sharing it with anyone. And we may focus on that A+ effort rather than that B- that I talked about last episode. And we may also end up focusing on showing up as a superstar in a career or a company or a culture that actually is not in alignment with our interests or with our values or who we are. Because when we skip over curiosity, we miss the opportunity to find a more fulfilling path. And so when we are spending more time and energy in this career, company, or culture that is not aligned with where we may thrive most, that also contributes to burnout. So there's a lot of layers here that can start to add on top of each other and contribute to these tendencies that are not serving us. And the last way that avoiding or misinterpreting feedback can cost you is that it reinforces perfectionism and imposter syndrome. And This is because over-preparing and trying to avoid criticism at all costs builds more thought patterns and beliefs around having to do things the right way all the time. And when we can't possibly be perfect all the time, we end up feeling like imposters and when we create these incredibly high standards, and we build even more self-doubt that we want to dismantle, and we get further away from the confidence and the self-worth and the belief that we can do things in ourselves. Like, we just get so much further from that. So this imposter syndrome is just perpetuated in this cycle as well. It can also make us over-index on our correction and completely miss balancing our prior behaviors that are working with the new one that we're trying to develop. So back to my coughing example, my manager personally found it distracting on calls when I would cough or clear my throat, which ultimately does not mean that it was wrong for me to do that. Because coughing and clearing your throat is a normal thing, right? Like, it's a human thing. It's just that she had a preference that I went on mute before I coughed on the phone. But instead of looking at this perspective and getting curious about it, like I said earlier, I spiraled. I did get upset. I did feel embarrassed. And I did worry that I embarrassed her too. And I chose to make this mean that I had to try to be silent on calls unless I was speaking something of value. And I completely overcorrected in the other direction. I overmuted. I undercommunicated. And then she eventually had to talk to me about that too. So I got very fixated on this feedback instead of just doing the things that I'm going to talk about next. So that can perpetuate that perfectionism. So how can we reframe feedback? Put most simply, feedback is neutral data. And what does that mean in real time? So first, feedback is not a verdict on your worth. Feedback does not change how valuable you are as a human. Receiving feedback does not mean that you aren't a good employee, and it doesn't mean that you don't know what you're doing. Anyone giving you feedback is sharing their own perspective, and the feedback is neutral. And so when you receive feedback, treat that as an input or a suggestion rather than judgment. For example, when I shared my initial podcast intro with my best friend and my husband, they did not like these symbols that I had in the background music. And they said that that was their only feedback. And it was because they found it distracting. But overall, they loved my messaging, they loved my voice, they loved the music otherwise, and most importantly, the overall purpose and focus of the podcast. They were extremely proud of me, so excited for what I was building, and they just didn't like one tiny part of it. And I decided to take their input, to view it as input and take it, and it led me to adjusting the music just a little bit, highlighting my voice more. I simplified other parts of the intro, and then I launched my podcast. And if I had taken their input to mean that it was judgment or internalized it to mean that, like, I don't know what a good intro sounds like. That was stupid. I don't even know how to do a podcast. What am I doing? I shouldn't be doing this. I'm terrible. How could I have thought that was a good idea? I never would have launched my first episode and probably never launched my podcast. And you know what? I could have kept the symbols in. You just never know. But I chose to act on this feedback. And that is an important lesson too, because you get to decide how to implement the neutral input of feedback or not. So remember, feedback is neutral. Take feedback as one input and not judgment. You can also get curious with yourself about if the feedback that was given to you is focused on a problem that you want to solve. So is the feedback that's given to you going to solve a problem that you are focused on solving? So this is like when your GPS suggests an alternate route to you. So your map application might say, do you want to save 2 minutes by taking this as exit? And you can click yes to save 2 minutes if you want to get there faster. But you can also click no because you would rather keep it simple and stay on the highway because you aren't in a rush to get to your next place and you don't want to have to navigate turns or stoplights that you aren't used to because that isn't a problem that you want to solve. So ask yourself, does this feedback align with a problem that I want to solve? And you can also use phrases to yourself like, this is information that I can choose to use or I can set it aside. Coming back to my clearing my throat story, when my manager shared her preference with me, she was really just giving me information that I could choose to take or leave. So sure, you could argue that it's technically more polite to go on mute if you're going to cough or clear your throat. You could also argue that it's human and that it's not a big deal and it doesn't need to be something that I focus on. But I wanted to show up professionally, clearly, and impress leaders who were many levels above me. And I wanted to impress my manager and I wanted to show up clearly to my manager and I didn't want to distract her. So I chose to take this feedback. Actually, throughout my career in a lot of settings after I got through the spiral of it all and learned a lot of lessons along the way. So even though I didn't handle it in the best way when I first received it, this is feedback that I try to take with me in a lot of scenarios. And it's just input that I've received and it's something that a problem I've chosen to solve. So to recap, beliefs that you can work on building in yourself to help you reframe feedback as neutral data are: feedback does not change your worthiness. Feedback is neutral. I take feedback as input rather than judgment. I take feedback if it aligns with a problem that I want to solve. I can set this information aside. I can use this feedback now, later, or never. I choose when it makes sense to act on feedback. Those are such powerful beliefs that you can adopt and ones that I continue to remind myself of, and learning how to take feedback as neutral data and navigate that in a way that isn't going to activate my perfectionist tendencies, all while figuring out if it's a problem that I do want to solve, is something that I'm still working on. But these have helped shift my perspective greatly, and I'm so excited for you to use them too. Now I want to talk about some practical steps that you can take to reclaim feedback. So there are a few steps. There's about 8 steps here that I'm going to talk you through. And so I encourage you to take what works for you. And if there's anything that inspires you but isn't exactly what you would do, take it and twist it and do something that works better for you and where you are at in your journey toward reclaiming feedback. So the first thing that I'm going to recommend to you is something that you should do before a planned feedback conversation. So this could be just a regular check-in with your manager, or if you're asking for feedback on a presentation or an email or a piece of work or something that you're doing, before you read the email that has the feedback, before you have the conversation with your manager. Or it can also look like a developmental conversation, like an annual review or a mid-year review or something like that. So I encourage you, before opening the email with the feedback, reading the message with the feedback, stepping into that conversation, to center yourself. Take some time, block the time out to center yourself in whatever way helps you feel grounded and in your own power. So this might look like doing a power pose. So one of the most common ones is like standing tall with your legs about shoulder width apart, putting your hands on your hips, rolling your shoulders back, chest high, looking up and doing a power pose. You can also do like a Superman, put your arms up in the air and just breathe in that stance for a few seconds and just deeply breathe into it. You can also have a mini dance party. So if you have a little bit of like energy flowing through you, some anxiety, I love to turn on a song that gets me pumped up and just have a mini little dance party to get those shakies, those jitteries out. You can meditate. You can go for a walk. Ultimately, you just need to clear your head or untangle thoughts and feelings, because you're always going to have thoughts and feelings come up, but just like really center yourself and get present and curious and intentional about what's going on in your mind, and remind yourself of the new beliefs that you are building around feedback. So feedback does not change my worthiness. Feedback is neutral. I take feedback if it aligns with a problem I want to solve. I choose when it makes sense to act on feedback. All of these things that we were just talking about a few minutes ago. So that's before you have the conversation or receive or read feedback. Okay. The next step can be when you're in the moment, and feedback is given to you on the fly, or even if it's planned. And this is to pause before reacting. So when you receive the feedback, take a breath, notice your body and ground yourself, and ask yourself, you don't have to say this out loud, how am I feeling right now? And if you are feeling really defensive and you feel it's a safe place to do so, ask that person, if it's a live conversation, if you can have a few minutes or maybe even a day or two to process what was shared with you before discussing further. You can say, hey, thank you so much for sharing this. I am noticing some feelings come up and I want to make sure I receive this feedback in a way that is helpful for you and for me. I so respect that you are giving me this feedback. I want to be receptive to it. And I'm just wondering if I can go take a walk for about 5 minutes and come back to this conversation, or if I can just sleep on this information that you've shared with me, and can we schedule a follow-up call to talk through it in more detail tomorrow, because I'm sure I'll have more questions. I just want to sit with this a little bit. So take that space, if you feel safe, to ask for some time to process if you're feeling really defensive. And then if you are feeling a little anxious or maybe just a little defensive, but you do feel ready to hear more and you do trust yourself to be able to be curious, remind yourself, I'm going to be curious, and then ask questions as neutrally as possible and take notes as this goes on in a live conversation. And if you are reading feedback in a message or an email or something like that, still do these things. And if you are feeling defensive, walk away, give yourself some time. If you can manage it and you can take the time to process the feedback, do take that time for yourself before coming back to it the next day, and let those emotions ride that emotional wave before acting on it or before getting defensive or responding right away. The next thing that you can do once you're ready to move into that curiosity stage is clarify intent. So you can ask, can you tell me more about what you mean? Or what is your goal in sharing this? So really get curious and ask more questions about what they mean, how it can serve them to implement the feedback, how it can benefit your career, how it benefits others. Just really try to explore the purpose and the impact of not implementing this feedback and implementing this feedback. Whatever you need to be able to understand where this is coming from. And even if you think you understand where it's coming from, do clarify with at least 1 or 2 questions, because you will likely hear something that you weren't initially thinking. And even if you do hear everything that you were thinking, you've just affirmed it. So you can feel good about knowing where it is, what the intention is and where it's coming from and why this feedback is being given to you, just for your own peace of mind. And then if you have a good relationship with your manager, you can also come up with some kind of system to further qualify the feedback. So this might be something that you do before this exact scenario where you're like having the feedback conversation, but this would be a great opportunity to pull that in. So an example of a system that you can qualify this feedback could be like a severity rating system. So it could be as simple as like red, yellow, or green. So red could mean something like, this feedback is urgent and you must fix it in order to keep your job. Or this feedback and you implementing it is critical to the successful outcome to a project. Yellow could mean that it's serious and they want you to take it seriously and it's stronger than a suggestion, but it's not threatening the result of a project or your employment. It might hinder your ability to get a raise or get promoted if you don't implement it or fix it, but you're still in good standing and it's still going to be okay. But it's just a little bit of a warning is what I might qualify as the yellow. And then finally, green could be something that is quite simply a suggestion to help you take something to the next level, or maybe it's just a stylistic preference of your manager. Hey, I'd prefer if you did it this way, but it's okay if you really want to do it the way that you have it originally. That red, yellow, green can really help you qualify the intention of the feedback that your manager is giving you. So for example, when we come back to my podcast intro, so based on that feedback from my husband and my best friend about the symbol in the intro, that was like a greenish yellow. So they thought removing it would really like level up my podcast intro. And that if I didn't, other people who had the same perspective as them might find it distracting. And if those people don't know me that well, they may not give my podcast a chance. So it's definitely not like completely green, and it's definitely not a yellow because I could still have it in there. Other people may not be bothered by the symbol. People may not like it, but they're like, whatever, I don't care about a symbol. I just don't like the symbol, but I like her podcast, so they might still listen. So it's not like something to really be concerned about. It just was like a greenish yellow, and I decided to take it. So I did. The next step after you clarify the intention is to separate your feelings from the facts and separate their feelings from the facts. So write down the key points from that feedback conversation without any emotional layer. So for example, Ray and Reba were distracted by the cymbal crash. That's a fact. I didn't include like, they didn't like it. They thought that I should not keep it. They think it would be stupid of me to include. They didn't say these things, but like I didn't add like, I'm stupid if I keep this, or nobody's going to listen if I keep this, or like, what am I thinking? I'm so embarrassed, because I was a little embarrassed about the cymbal crash, but they were distracted. Add that. Like, they were distracted by the crash. That's a fact. Another fact. My manager is distracted when I cough on calls and don't go on mute. Fact. Not, I'm going to ruin my career if I don't start muting before I cough on a call. It's funny that these two examples are related to getting distracted by something, but it doesn't always have to be distraction. So it could be like, my manager wants me to simplify the messaging in this email, or my manager was confused by this line, or my manager thought that the design of this could be more enhanced. So just make sure that you add their thoughts. If it is a thought that they have, like, this needs more, don't say the fact is this needs more. It's, my manager thinks this needs more. So write the facts. So the next thing is that after you write down these key points, like while this feedback is happening, take some time to decompress and process. So just like when you centered yourself before the conversation, take time to do so after the conversation. So go for a walk, go get a fun beverage or coffee, listen to some music, meditate, have a little dance party, decompress, and then take some time to reflect and ask yourself, how did I show up in that conversation? What questions did I ask? What information did I get? What information, if any, do I still want? And then, as you continue to reflect, identify some conversation takeaways. So first, look for some useful nuggets. So identify 1 to 2 takeaways that you want to use. So maybe it's that despite their feedback, you want to keep doing what they said they didn't like. So I could have kept the symbols in my podcast intro. Or my takeaway from my conversation with my manager was that wherever possible, I would try to mute when I needed to cough or to clear my throat. And then identify 1 to 2 things that you need to follow up with the feedback giver on. So do you want to tell them which pieces of feedback you're implementing and how you're doing that? Or do you need to clarify anything after taking some time to process? What are some things you can do to close the loop on that conversation and to show the person who gave you that feedback that you respect them, you trust their opinion, you're grateful for the feedback, and that you have considered it whether or not you are going to take it, or you've considered it and realized that it opened up a completely different problem that you want to solve for you. So just close that loop and show them that you have really considered what they've shared with you so that you continue to get feedback, because you may not have wanted their feedback this time, but they could give you more helpful feedback in the future, or feedback that is more relevant to you and what you want feedback on, or it may help you solve a problem that you are focused on solving. So if you don't show them that you do appreciate this feedback and that you are grateful and that you have taken it into consideration and have managed it and reclaimed it in a powerful, neutral way, then they may not continue to give you feedback. So this is just an extra little thing you can do to continue that flow of information and invite it into your life. So the next thing is to practice non-attachment, and just to remind yourself that you don't have to agree or implement all feedback. And this is really throughout the whole process, but this is great to do, especially after you have that conversation, before and after you have that conversation as well, so that you are trusting yourself, because this is building your self-confidence and your ability to discern which feedback is good for you at that point in time or not, and to create that non-attachment to the feedback emotionally. So just keep practicing that throughout this whole process. And then finally, you can continue to build your feedback resilience by seeking small doses of feedback intentionally. And I mean it when I say small. So before you're going to a meeting where you're going to be delivering a presentation, you could ask your manager in advance to observe and give you 1 to 2 pieces of feedback based on that presentation. So it could be on your delivery or the content or something. Just ask them for 1 or 2 pieces of feedback. You could also ask for a peer to look for a specific thing that you're working on. Like in that same meeting, you could ask your colleague to count the number of times that you said the word especially if you're working on reducing your filler words. You can also share an email draft introducing a new project or a program or a product or idea that is going to go to leadership or to a client. You could share that draft with a colleague or a manager and ask them to tell you what they notice first, and what, if anything, confuses them, or if anything stands out to them. And then take those responses as neutral pieces of information that you get to decide what to do with. Now, as we are wrapping up the overall meat of this week's episode, I'm offering a reflection prompt to you, and I will also put this in the show notes. And I want you to think of a piece of feedback that you have received recently and get curious with yourself. That's a huge thing I'm going to be suggesting in all of my episodes. If you haven't picked on that picked up on that already. So when you're getting curious with yourself, you can ask yourself, how did I interpret this feedback? And how would it feel to view this feedback as neutral data instead of judgment? And then see what that opens up for you. So take some time to do that reflection. So today, we talked about a lot of things. So we talked about why feedback feels threatening to perfectionists. We talked about the cost of avoiding or misinterpreting feedback and how to reframe feedback as neutral data. And then we talked through some practical steps to reclaim feedback the very next time you receive it and how to make feedback work for you instead of against you. And remember, feedback is not a measure of your worth. Feedback is a tool that you can reclaim and use on your own terms. I encourage you to practice the reframing steps at least once this week. And if it feels good to try this on with a colleague or with a manager, do it. But if you want to take a smaller step, you can try practicing this with a loved one or someone really close to you, like your partner or a friend or a family member. Just try practicing these steps with them. And you can tell them why you're doing it and that your goal is to reclaim feedback and have it work for you instead of against you. And thank you so much for listening today. I am so excited to keep sharing this content with you all. It means so much to me that you are listening, and it would mean so much if you continue to like and rate the show, share the podcast if you think this would resonate with someone, subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to. You can follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or on YouTube. Leave comments. Let me know what you think about this episode. I'd love to hear what your biggest insight from today's episode is, what has opened up for you after listening. And until next time, I will look forward to talking to you soon. Thank you so much. This was Perfecting Imperfectionism.
Thank you for listening to Perfecting Imperfectionism. Tune in each week for a new episode where we will explore challenges that overt and covert perfectionists face. For more information on how to work with me, or if you want customized one-on-one support, head to lauracoaches.com to book your complimentary consultation with me, where you'll learn more about yourself, your goals, and the steps you need to take to achieve them. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Always consult a qualified professional to address your specific concerns.